Hey there everybody, Eric from Outer Limitless coming at you today with another video. Now in a prior video, we took a look at some really neat infrared sensors from the company Bestguarder. Bestguarder making a number of different products, generally speaking, revolving around infrared or night vision technology. Well, today, in this particular case, we are going to look at a night vision scope adapter from Bestguarder. This to me is going to be pretty exciting. I've been waiting to get my hands on this for a little bit now, and I cannot wait to put this into good practical field use. So also in another prior video, we had taken a look at a slightly different unit from another company. I know that these things can take a little bit to get them set up. It's not, I'm gonna say, completely finicky, but at the same time, it takes a little patience, it takes a little understanding, and it takes a little bit of time. So again, today what we're going to do, we're going to get this initially set up on my Ruger 1022. This is a perfect platform for me to test and try. And then in a future video, we're going to get it out to the range. So today's video, more about the first impressions and the actual setup of this Bestguarder and its Wi-Fi digital infrared scope adapter. But with that said, I have a whole bunch to do and a whole bunch to share with you. And if you're interested in seeing a little bit more about what I'm about to get into, do me a favor, stay tuned. Now before we get too far, I would like to say thank you very much to the people at Bestguarder who did provide this for review. Now, so far, Bestguarder products, I am definitely impressed. They've done a very nice job. I've looked at a few of their products, and now at this point looking at this Wi-Fi digital night vision system. Now when it says system, we're going to have to get into this in some detail. It has a little monitor screen, it has the scope adapter, a number of different parts and pieces to this, and on top of it, it's going to need to be charged up. I haven't even as much as opened the box so I could get a first look, first impression, and bring all of you along throughout this setup process. And so as we get into this here, the first thing, these systems are not cheap. I mean, they're not super expensive, but they're not cheap, and prices will vary depending on sort of what brand and what products you get your hands on. But the Bestguarder stuff kind of striking the balance between a reasonably affordable system and then one of nice high quality. And as I mentioned, so far I've been very happy with Bestguarder products. So I think as we get into this here, we should see everything nicely packaged and packed away. And wow. So right away, my initial impressions, this is much larger than I had anticipated. But yeah, this is going to take a little bit to figure out. So let's go through all the parts and pieces. So first and foremost, you can see there is a strap. This is part of the actual scope adapter. Your infrared emitter, which is massive. Look at the size of this thing. And then plus your screen. So that's like a TV screen almost. Some different adapters. I believe these will go on the eyepiece to your scope, but we'll get into this. Probably makes sense for me to actually review the paperwork a little bit. So let me just take a real quick look at this. I want to make sure I'm accurate in what I'm telling you. Okay, so these here are called scope clamps. So these actually clamp onto the scope. And there's 4 of these of different sizes. So depending on the diameter of your scope, there are 4 different sizes. And these are referred to as scope sleeves. So there are 3 scope sleeves, again, depending on the size of your eyepiece. This is actually technically called the camera module. And this is the LCD screen and illuminator. So an illuminator module. And then last but not least, your USB cable. So anyway, as we get into this, we're going to learn a little bit about all of this together. Now, again, for my demonstration, I am using my Ruger 1022, but more specifically, kind of need to pay attention to my actual scope. Which here, if we take a look at this, we are using my Vortex Copperhead. So this is going to be just for a reference point. This is a 44 millimeter objective lens, so that is just something worth keeping in mind. And the first thing I can see is that we're going to have to get one of these scope clamps. So here are these scope clamps to fit on this. Now, it could probably go one of a couple of ways, but I definitely need to have everything facing forward. And so what the real instructions look like to me, and depending on your exact setup, but they basically have this all set up so that it is behind your adjustment knobs. Now, to me, I think I kind of want this, I guess it's hard to say. No matter what you do, it's going to kind of get in the way of your adjustment. So you might want to pay attention to that. And the other thing is I'm going to have to spread out my scope rings far enough to actually accept the spacing of the clamp. But then on top of that, I don't have too much more room on my pick rail. So we'll take a look at that real quick. And so here, as you take a look at my rail, I had set up my scope initially to pretty much span almost the entire thing. Now, I have since made a little bit of an adjustment, and I realized that I have one more notch. So here, I have one single more notch. So if I was to loosen these up, slide this back, and kind of space this appropriately, I'm fairly certain without too much difficulty I can get one of these scope clamps in there. But that is the first thing worth considering, making sure that you have enough room to fit the clamp on your scope itself and within the spacing you have for your scope rings. And so now you can see I have my actual scope rings spread as wide as they can go. So all the way forward, all the way back. And at this point, my scope is literally floating here inside the rings. Now I need to start making some judgments about how I'm going to mount the actual scope clamp. And I got to figure out the right diameter. That's the other piece. I haven't quite done that yet. But just in theory, let's talk about this. So the IR emitter and screen gets mounted directly onto the scope. And as I take a look at this and thinking about it, the actual scope clamp clamps onto this piece on the back, and then you face your screen towards your face. So my shot going this way and trying to figure out how this is going to mount. The next thing I can tell you is this cable, if you're not careful, will get in the way of your adjustment knob. So the reality is I probably want to slide my scope as forward as possible so that I can get my clamp on this area, and that's going to allow the actual screen to mount without the cable getting in the way of my adjustment knob. Just taking a real quick measurement on the outside diameter of my tube. Well, that looks to be ballpark roughly about a 1-inch diameter, which this one's a little big. This one here seems to be probably just about right, although this one is a better fit. So I suggest I'm going to try the smallest scope mount here. So let's try this out. And so you can see it will be tight. I'm hoping this is going to go on fairly easy. You can see should just snap down and into place, which it does. And to me, that's still going to be quite loose. So I got to be careful here because that will never tighten down all the way. And so ultimately what I needed to do was make up some of the diameter on my tube. So I got some nice wide shrink tubing, kind of leveraged some electrical tape, got it all wrapped around. And at this point, I was able to use the scope adapter here and clamp it onto my scope. And the funny thing is, well, at this point, I actually had to go up 1 diameter, but you can see here, this is actually in pretty good shape, all things considered. So you may need to build this out just a little bit to get it to work for you. Now, the next thing in my consideration, you'll notice that I do have my adjustment knob here, so my windage adjustment on this side of the scope. So I put the mounting knob on this side of the scope just to kind of clean it up so that I didn't have a ton of competition here. I figure this is going to be busy enough, so sort of spreading this out so that I'm not going to say getting confused, but in conflict with my actual adjustment knob. So at this point, I'm getting there. Now the next thing, I got to kind of get my scope rings and everything mounted back onto the rifle. All right, so now scope mounted back onto the rifle. I feel like I have everything squared up pretty well for the most part, at least it seems to be. And I think I'm happy enough with the placement of this scope mount adapter. So at this point moving forward, I should be able to get the rest of this into place. So this is the illuminator module and LCD screen. Of course, the illuminator module needing to go forward. And so this should pretty much just slide in. If I open up the spacing here, that does literally just pop right into place. And getting this mounted upright, I hope this has enough clamping power now that it's got something filling some of the gap. But we'll see. And again, you can see as I'm clamping on here, the reason why I wanted this on the opposite side of my scope adjustment, because that is tight and the spacing on here definitely getting a little bit tight, but the clamp is working perfectly. So my little sort of MacGyver work being about right. So again, keep in mind you may need to sort of further this out a little bit to get it to work for your particular scope. And so now you can see what this looks like on top of the scope. Of course, it's making this a very large assembly. That's my first impression. I mean, this setup is just quite large. It's not heavy. That's a good thing. Reasonable plastic, I'd say mid-weight plastic. So it's not going to be the most robust, but at the same time, it's truly all it needs to be. So you can see here, you know, it does fit nicely, but it makes things just a little bit bulky. Now, this is going to be interesting to see what it's like to pack this up and go to the range. What I can tell you already is, unfortunately, many of these companies don't think about the practical application of the fact that, you know, at this point, I need to break this thing down, get it built into the case, get out to the range, get it set up. Now, for me personally, most of my setup is done here in a controlled environment, and I don't have, you know, all the space in the world at the range. There's other people, there's other considerations. It might be loud. I'm under a little bit of pressure. I like to work here in a controlled environment, so when I get to the range, everything is set up to the best of my ability. So having the ability to pack this down effectively and still have it in calibration and, you know, reasonable setup when I get to the range is key. So we'll see how that goes. So far, I think I'll be able to leave the actual scope mount on the scope, pack up my rifle, no problem, and then have the camera set aside and then attach this when I get to the range. But anyway, at this point, let's get to the next step. So the next step is the scope sleeve, and this is about 42 millimeters, and there are 3 different scope sleeves. But this one here, as I take a look, is just about right. Now, this is sort of a rubber, and it's tight, but as long as you're careful and kind of wiggle this thing around just a little bit, it seems like it wants to go on. So if you have super nice, super high end, and I guess what I would say, you really care about them optics, you might not enjoy this piece, but yes. So this now is on. Ooh, and you got to be careful because I just spun this, which means it's going to throw it a little bit out in terms of my focus, but let's hope for the best. And seating that on there, I think that's probably about right. I mean, I've buried it about as far as I care to go. And as I look at it on the inside, does look like if you push it to the right depth, it will bottom out, which should be right there. So I think I fully seated this and bottomed it out as far as it can go onto the eyepiece of the scope. And so here we have the camera module. Now I got to be careful. Everything here uses batteries. It uses 4 18650s. So I have them on the charger ready to go. I have 4 of the same 18650s and they're in good shape, so that shouldn't be a problem. Here you can see on your camera module, this does come with a 32 gig card, and I love that it's literally right here on the outside. This is actually very convenient and easy to get to. And this mounts on the back side of the scope here. So again, just being a little bit careful and wiggling all this. Yeah, see, my eyepiece is definitely spinning on me, so you need to be really careful. And I can probably crank down the lock nut a little bit tighter. But yeah, that goes right in. And that appears to be fully seated. So that is the camera module. And we're getting to pretty good shape. This is cool. Now this is your power supply and AV cable. This does come off of your IR emitter and screen, and then it goes down to the camera module. You can see there's much more than enough here. So I'm going to be a little bit careful. This starts to get into some cord and cable management right on your firearm. Now, I do also want to be careful as you look here. It could interfere with my ability to quickly and effectively get on my zoom, on my actual scope. So I'm going to route this carefully and make sure everything's out of my way. So the considerations, I mean, amongst everything else, not only do I need this to function appropriately, but I need to make sure that I have appropriate mechanics on my firearm. So taking all of that into consideration as I set this up, I'll probably be better off getting my cable onto this side. So I'm clear of my chamber and clear of all of my knobs and everything, and then routing this down. And the other thing it's going to do is stay away from my grip and my trigger finger. So I think getting everything routed carefully off to the side is going to make a big difference. So it's just going to take a minute for me to figure this out, and we'll move on. And so at this point, I do have this mounted. Now, I did come up with a couple of impressions, and I think they're fairly important. Now, keep in mind, you're adding cables to your firearm. You're adding literally cables that don't have any way to secure them. Now, for me personally, I have Velcro wraps. I did use Velcro wraps to get this nice and tidy. But to the people at Bestguarder, I mean, keep in consideration that somebody might become mobile. You don't know exactly how somebody's going to use this. They may need to move. They're not just stationary potentially. And to have cables and things hanging off your firearms, in my opinion, not the best. So my solution, again, was using some of these Velcro wraps, and I think this kit should come with them and have the ability to really wrap all this down. Now, I did my best to get this secure. I did my best to get it off to the side. You really don't want to use zip ties because remember what I said before about bringing this like to the range. Yes, I've set this up here, but this needs to be able to be disassembled. And the bottom line is, well, your cables are permanently affixed into the screen and to the IR emitter, and then you plug them into the camera module. Well, at that point, the problem being that you have to take this off to put it in your travel case, to put it in your, rifle case. And if you have to take this off, well, the cables need to go with it. And if you zip tie it all to your scope and whatever, that's not going to work. So one of a couple of things, either you need to actually be able to hardwire into the camera or make them double-sided cables that both unplug. But to me, the way that this is done and hardwired straight into the actual IR emitter and the screen, this is the piece that needs to really come off to make it portable, so you can't zip tie all this to your equipment. So in my opinion, add the Velcro sort of enclosures here and give you the ability to wrap everything up. But luckily for me, I just had some stuff laying around. Now here's the battery compartment on the top of the IR emitter, and this should just like slide out here. Yes. And there's not a whole heck of a lot of room. So you need to be really careful because the cables here are very tight. So I hope this is rechargeable. If you can get these put in and then plug this in to recharge it, that's going to make a big deal. So let's try this out. I'm just going to get my 4 18650s in here. Keep in mind this does not come with the batteries. This isn't too bad. I mean, you can do it. You just need to be very careful, as I mentioned, because I could see you really having a problem with those cables if you're not careful. And I'm not going to screw this all the way down for the moment because I'm curious if I can recharge these batteries right inside this unit. So we're going to leave that for now. Peeling off the protective layers here. This does have a USB Type-C port on the side, so that leaves me a little bit optimistic. But now let's see what happens. All right, so this in the middle is on, off, and record. So let's see. All right, so this might catch you if you're not careful. On the very top here, your LCD brightness. So turning that to the right, ba-boom, there you go. So that's pretty cool. The fact that you can dial in the actual like LCD brightness, I could see that totally coming into play. Now, on the top end, it's not quite as responsive as I would hope. I'd like to see that sort of curve smoothed out a little bit. Maybe just get, that's the dimmest it can go. And now, let's see. I'm coming up on, that's about the 50% mark. And from 50% on, it really doesn't change the brightness at all. But whatever, not a big deal. That at least is working. Now this switch here, this switches to photo. This switches to video. And this here, I don't know if that's playback. Oh, I don't know. That might be time-lapse, but that seems weird to me. Yeah, it's time-lapse. I don't exactly understand why you'd need time-lapse through a scope like this. But maybe the intent is to use this camera module in different ways. I'm not really too sure, to be honest with you. Now, this is a camera focus dial here. And as you see, oh, that's really cool. Check this out. You should be able to see the crosshairs. And as I focus one way or the other, that's fully blurry. Now the crosshairs coming into perfect focus. And it's pushing out a little bit, but that's spot on there. So that's nice and super easy. Then I should have all my different menu modes. So let's see. Oh, crazy. So that's infrared. So long pressing on the right hand button. You can see here, that's what goes to infrared. So a little click, you can hear it there. Long press on the left. Oh, here's your different menu modes. So here's menu, video size. You can see 1080 at 30 frames per second. That's awesome. Time lapse. Oh my God, you can actually like set it and do your interval. So this is actually fairly sophisticated. Again, I don't know why you'd need it, but it's a tool that I now have. So that is kind of cool. Date stamp, I'd say probably on for me. Kind of like to show maybe when I've been working on things. Year, month, date. So yeah, year, month, date. Format. And you can set your latitude and longitude. That is kind of nutty. I'm not going to do that. I like to kind of maintain a little bit of a low profile on my footage here, but you certainly could do so if you had coordinates. That's kind of neat. Photo resolution, 12 megapixels. I'll get my date and time stamp set. All right, so the next piece of this is the Wi-Fi. Now, as I click into here, I can set a Wi-Fi password. We'll get into that in a little bit, but I'm just going to leave it default 123456789 I have no reason to necessarily need or want to change this. System. I don't know what that means, but this is the WG-90 and it looks like version 5. And so that's my setup. So that was very easy, and you long press your menu button and you back out to the main screen. The other knob on the top here worth talking about, that's your IR emitter. So that's going to be the intensity. And actually, so if I long press here, this should go completely white, and it does. And you can see, yeah, that definitely works. So beaming it brighter and back down to dim. Really cool. So the menus and the knobs and everything so far, extremely easy. that part of this I greatly like. So this is coming together. It's coming together nicely. It's mounted. It's pretty clean. I've managed to get things tidy. Just some considerations for the people at Bestguarder if they want to add some little improvements to this. But generally speaking, definitely moving in the right direction. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to the Wi-Fi ability, you can connect to a smartphone. It gives you different additional options. It says right in the instructions to download the Bestguarder Player app from the Android or Apple Store. And I cannot find it. I'm on Android. I'm in the Play Store. I cannot find it. So that will be a follow-up for another time. I'm going to have to do a little bit of research, maybe even reach out to the people at Bestguarder and see how to get that app. But at this point, fairly well set up. I do need to make some adjustments, I think. I mean, just looking at it here, this is off-center from my actual scope. And so here's the next part that's really going to be a consideration. So I was wondering how to get this adjusted. I'm literally just like tugging it around a little bit and trying to get it centered in the screen, and that looks pretty good, but I end up with like a real dark shading on one side and then the other side, it's hard to say, and then nothing is in focus. So again, this is going to take some considerable effort to figure out exactly how to dial this in. Now, I can get my crosshairs almost perfectly centered in the screen. At least it is darn close. And it's just a little touchy. And if you go too far, you're kind of pushing it, come on, out of alignment. I mean, I can get it pretty darn close, all things considered, and I'm fairly happy with how my crosshairs look in the screen. Now, I'm sure this is going to be very similar to exactly what I've experienced with this type of setup in the past. At close range, you have to make a decision. Do you look at your crosshairs or do you focus on your target? And that's something that you're going to need to consider. Now, beyond 50 yards, somewhere I would say probably between 75 and 100 yards, you can get to the point where you can focus on both your target and your crosshairs. So these do work a little bit better at length than they do for close up. But at this point, let's get this started. I'm going to hit record. So this is now recording in the Bestguarder unit. I'm hoping that this is picking up my audio. We're going to try that out. So at some point, I'll swap this over for the Bestguarder audio so you can hear what it sounds like. Now, you can see that I am able to record. Now, I'm going to make a couple of quick little adjustments here to try to get this so that it's in the screen where you can see it. Now, I have a test target out there, and as I move the focus knob, you can see at this point getting my crosshairs perfectly in focus. That's the first thing. Now, at least at this point, my crosshairs are perfectly in focus, but notice that my target is not. But as I move my focus ring, well, now I'm bringing my actual target into focus, but unfortunately what that means is my actual crosshairs of my scope are now not in focus. So that is a consideration. And as you take a look at it here, you can see, you can pretty much still see a nice ghost image of the actual crosshairs. So it should get you pretty close, but it might not be perfect. So that is definitely a consideration. Now, the next thing to consider, I definitely, after messing around with all this stuff, I need to bring my scope back into alignment. So that's going to be a little bit of work. I'm going to actually have to get my bore laser in here. I'm going to have to align my scope, but that's why I left room to get on all of my adjustment knobs. So I can still get in here. I can still fine tune everything. That's not going to be a problem at all. I can get my caps off. That would frustrate me. Imagine if you couldn't get your caps off. Oh my God, that would drive me crazy. But yep, you can do it. It's tight. It's at the edge, but you can do it. So there we go. So yeah, generally speaking, at this point, I feel as though I have this to the point where I can get it dialed in, get it to the range, and hopefully get some good footage out of this. It will be interesting to see how this goes. Now, long pressing the middle button this turns off, and it turns off fairly quickly. Again, now that my screen is adjusted, a long press comes right on. So the response time from on to running and then back off, fantastic, super fast. And just finally, plugging in the USB Type-C adapter. I can't tell, there's no indication of if this is actually charging. I don't see any sort of lights or anything like that. I wonder, does it charge the opposite direction through the micro USB? I don't know. I cannot really tell. So I'm gonna have to figure that out. I'm not positive if this is actually rechargeable or not. And so at this point, at least I have everything set up, ready to go, tested, and I know that this works. My next steps for me, I'm going to get my scope into an alignment where I can start to trust this. We're going to get this to the range and do a full functional range test. I'm really excited to see how that goes. Now, the good thing is, at least it seems like the unit itself is out of my way. Obviously, I can't look through the actual scope, but nor do I need to. I have like this nice TV screen sitting in front of me. It's going to be real interesting to see what that's like and if I can even hit my targets. But bottom line is, I mean, to the people at Bestguarder, thank you very much. I am very interested in checking this out. I think some minor refinements just right away in my setup. Really, some minor refinements would go a long way. Definitely, I would say, adding some rubber shims and the ability to shim this out right on your scope, that would be key. Having the Velcro enclosures here to keep your cables nice and tight, that would be key. And then the other thing, and this is just a subtlety, but you'll notice on the back side of the camera adapter here, that camera module, you just have this door sort of flapping open. It's okay. I mean, not perfect. That's something that, to me, you just kind of need to manage with the rest of your cable management. But again, not a big deal. If this is rechargeable, I can't tell. I have no idea and no way of knowing. I've looked in the instructions. I can't figure it out. So I'm just going to tighten down this battery compartment, plug it into a USB Type-C adapter, and hope for the best. But other than that, next time, we're going to get out to the range. So, all right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Again, to the people at Bestguarder, thank you very much. And for the rest of you, if you like this content, do me a favor, take a look at my Outer Limitless channel, which is more my primary gear. On that channel, I cover everything from hiking, camping, and backpacking excursions, all the gear that goes with it. So from sleep systems, shelter systems, knives, axes, backpacks, flashlights, you name it, that's my Outer Limitless YouTube channel. So all right, guys, thanks for stopping by. I hope you like what you saw. I hope you found it a little bit informative. If you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Take care now. I'll see you soon.